If you ask anyone about small builds, they'll simply say they're weak and unsuitable for use. Especially if it's old, but what if this build is the world's most powerful for the year? 2015, can we truly rely on this build after 10 years? So I tested it with a wide range of games in today's video. We'll explore the system's components piece by piece, look at the processor and graphics card, and see if this build can hold its own today against massive builds despite all this effort in my attempts to deliver unique, non-repetitive content. And high quality, this channel remains unfairly overlooked for unknown reasons. If you love this type of content, watch the video to the end without skipping, leave a nice comment below, it's the biggest support possible. Support the channel and start with the system's core, Intel's i7-6700 Skylake, which was then considered the most powerful processor. In 2015, it became the world's first desktop processor aimed at the average user. Not only that, the first desktop DDR4 technology became available to ordinary users after being exclusive to Zeus CPUs on the X99 platform, which was not. Only professionals and the very wealthy could afford it, as it was outrageously expensive. Honestly, it wasn't easy to reach this masterpiece. I had to open the entire case. To show you the beating heart of this system, it uses an i7-6700 Skylake with a 4-core design. A Core 8-thread, 14nm CPU launched at about $350. If we factor in inflation, the price back then was a fairly hefty amount, but despite its power. Despite the processor's power, there's a historical fact worth mentioning. Had there not been i7 processors from the 4th generation, which preceded this processor by 2 years, made the i7-6700 Skylake an undisputed evergreen, but the 4th generation. It dominated the market and eclipsed the 6th generation's shine, making this generation seem just another one. Ordinary, yet the imprint of this processor remains clear in history, even being compared in performance to other CPUs. Popular budget option today such as the Ryzen 3 30-100 or a 10th generation i3, so it can't. When discussing Intel's processor history, the i7-6700 Skylake stands out as a legendary, enduring chip. For over a decade it still stands proud, and now we arrive at the system's most important component. Honestly, Asus literally challenged itself. They managed to fit a flash card into a case of this size, which was a challenge at the time. And a genuine accomplishment. Honestly, look at the card's reinforcement, a metal cage that fully encloses it providing. It looks majestic and luxurious, but let's see how they managed it. This can't be installed. You can't install the card the traditional way at all. It's physically impossible because there's no space. It never permits it, and a surprisingly simple solution appears. They use this tiny piece, a razor. The miniature method of installing the card in this position looks literally like a work of art, but we uncover the hidden, strip this warrior of its armor to see what's inside, and here appears. One of the most powerful cards at the time was the GTX 980. I consider it among the strongest because the official title was reserved for it. GTX Titan X built on Maxwell, and I also have a GTX 980 Ti. The GTX 980 Ti, nearly the world's fastest gaming graphics card in 2015, yet I still prefer it. Using this card because honestly it looks nicer and fits the build better, but the best part is all that the version we have is the AFODR edition, which I personally find the most beautiful, and I'm wondering about it. Honestly, just look at the sheer beauty and elegance. It's truly magnificent and almost surreal. Personally, simply holding a card like this lifts my spirits. I'm ecstatic. If you love the AFAI editions, just comment. This was released. It was released at the end of 2014, priced at $550, and indeed flash chip cards were relatively inexpensive. It's built on a 28nm process, large for the time but normal, and its VRAM capacity. 4GB is modest today but usable. The card runs at about 1200 MHz. But in terms of power consumption, the two 6-pin connectors are only theoretically adequate because the card consumes roughly 170 W, but a drawback of the killer AFI Overdrive Edition is the edition runs extremely hot due to poor cooling, and we'll now see. We'll cover this more shortly in the cooling section. When the card is disassembled, the system reveals its construction. It's an unusual 24GB unit, yet it arrives in a form factor smaller than standard RAM. The conventional type, known as SODIMM, is designed specifically for netbooks or mini PCs. This is the first Corsair module of this version. It was originally meant for a Mac, but it works fine for us, coming in a 16GB capacity. It's a gigabyte running at 266 MHz, while the second module is 8GB but operates at a lower frequency. 2133 MHz. As expected, mixing two RAM sticks with different speeds forces them to run at the slower rate. Sure, this slightly impacts performance. You can try manually increasing the frequency. Via the BIOS to achieve the best possible performance. We'll definitely do that in a moment, despite all this capacity. 24 GB remains a strong option even today, and obtaining RAM with higher frequencies would certainly be. It was the best option, but at that time, we had only just moved past the DDR generation. Its limited speeds make this option only moderately good. I really wished it had a drive. It supports Blu-ray discs, but unfortunately the system only has a DVD drive, yet its design is very sleek. It blends beautifully with the device's design, especially the front panel, and as for storage, I found it very good despite the PC being old, with only an M.2 PCIe Gen storage drive. All of this is from Samsung, 500 GB, and certainly offers very reasonable speeds. This storage was released in 2019. It's clear the previous owner upgraded this PC, and this is evident from types of RAM and storage, and it's also nice to find a mechanical hard drive in this system, where I discovered this bear hidden deep inside the system during a winter sleep, a 1 TB drive. From Toshiba, I expected it to be a 2.5-inch drive. Small cases like this usually contain one. Limited space with powerful components for that era makes things even more complicated because all the components retain heat inside, and the processor is definitely the hottest part. The graphics card, when we examine the internal airflow, reveals that the system depends on its fan. It uses a dual fan setup that pushes air upward out of the case, and the graphics card also features a blower-style fan. Our style, honestly, its cooling is poor because the fan is noisy, and the heatsink is also. Its efficiency and size are modest. It has no heat pipes, only a copper base. At the bottom, I found that all the openings are sealed with fabric tape to prevent hot air from leaking backward. The only hot air vent exhausts directly outward, returning to the CPU cooling heat. A decently sized longitudinal heatsink with many fins that improves cooling efficiency, featuring two mixed copper heat pipes. The bottom base is also made of copper, and we ran a multi-core Cinebench test. The Bench R23 is a suitable benchmark for testing temperature because it fully stresses the processor. Our friend scored around 4,800 points, while I logged 82 degrees C, not ideal but acceptable. Considering the system's size and cooling, here's a broader look at the CPU's performance compared to other processors. According to CPU Monkey, the GPU, after a while on Firmark, logged 83 degrees C. This caused the card's speeds to slow down because it wouldn't let the temperature climb higher. Even the GPU hotspot was around 97 degrees C, which is normal as long as the difference stays under 20 degrees C, while power draw was around 180 W overall. It's not exactly pleasant, but it isn't dangerous either, and it's also the strangest. I noticed this system runs on two power supplies combined into one. Here's a look. The first 180-watt power supply feeds the CPU, motherboard, and RAM to ensure stability. The performance handles regular tasks, and the second 230W charger is dedicated to the graphics card. Specifically because it requires massive or high power, the total system power is roughly. We combine the two power supplies, totaling about 400 W, but this is considered net power roughly equivalent to. I tested the system with a wide variety of games at the outset. In Battlefield 1, a game from the system's era at the highest 10 ITB Ultra City settings, the PC managed to around 90 FPS with an excellent 1% low. The experience was very smooth. The GPU is also at 100%. The CPU is heavily used, and clock speeds stay stable despite suboptimal temperatures. But it stays stable thanks to the cooling, and the game fully utilizes the system's specs. Even though the card runs hot, that's normal for the AFI Founder Edition. Overall, the edition got off to a reasonably good start. The Drin, a relatively recent game, I tested at 10 ET. At the maximum 10 TB settings, honestly the device delivers heroic, excellent performance, with frame rates around 40 FPS, reaching the low 50s in WarS when stable. A bottleneck was present. It's slight in some scenarios because the CPU doesn't fully exploit the GPU's power, but if you ask me. As for an experience like this, I can tell you it's a satisfactory one. I've finished many games at 30 FPS, so 50 FPS is very good, almost indistinguishable from 60 FPS, and by the way, this Far Cry 6 is capped at 60 FPS. I tested it in benchmark mode. The internal test is a bit more demanding because it stresses the worst-case scenarios for ETB overall. At this high setting with FSR on, the performance was very respectable. We completed the benchmark at 60 Frames, sure, I don't need to tell you it's excellent. The system could have delivered more. Furthermore, note that GPU usage ranges from 80% to 90% if we had a version. The K variant of this CPU yielded higher FPS, but overall I'm very satisfied because it. A good experience given the system's age. I consider the 5th generation Forza Horizon a benchmark. Fundamental in any benchmark for me, at 10 ITB high settings we achieved. Excellent frame rates over 80 FPS, a high-end experience, truly impressive for a 10-year-old PC. Very excellent and outstanding experience, even the single player would be stable as I said. Fairly decent experience. GTA V, the 5th edition, is known to tax the CPU more. Especially for older machines, 1080p at maximum settings or very high settings as well. SMI tops 100 FPS, honestly good, but it's because the processor is weak, or rather the GPU. It's considered the strongest, though frame rates sometimes dropped into the 70s, especially at. Even with intense fights and crowded scenes, it still manages these frame rates on a machine like this. Mafia 3 is a good and respectable game for me. I'm insanely passionate about this type of game. The Cat Amjad draws a lot of attention, and the game's action is set in Louisiana, one of the poorest U.S. states, specifically in New Orleans, an American city with a Latin-Mexican vibe I've often dreamed of visiting. Louisiana, or the state of Louisiana, never mind. At max 10 ITP settings we achieved about 60. A frame at 1%, if that's impressive. The good thing is that the system's resources were being used perfectly, and because the game is almost as old as the PC, it's honestly impressive and a solid experience. Metro Exodus. Relatively old, yet still demanding and requiring fairly powerful hardware at 10 ETB. At high settings, this time our friend achieved frame rates between the 50s and 60s. Sure, it delivers solid, respectable performance. Riders Republic at 10 GB, max settings, nice graphics with. The gameplay is nice too, delivering about 50 FPS with a decent 1% low, which is certainly respectable performance. Honestly, I love these games because they're unconventional. I'm personally fed up with shooters and fantasy titles. A simple game like this with excellent gameplay is enough to create good fun and provide a satisfying experience. Completely different experience. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, even though it's an old game, still feels current. In virtually every benchmark, using the same settings as before, we achieved decent frame rates right. It's not quite 60 FPS, but it's very close to the target and the figures remain respectable. Especially on an old PC playing High City Sniper 2 or The Sniper, I don't see the point. Including it in this specific benchmark was likely just a nostalgic nod to the old Sniper games or an attempt to try as many games as possible on this build, whether over the past years or within a single year. In 2010, Sniper games were a genuine trend, but this game is relatively new, 10 ETB. At the maximum 10 ITP settings we hit 70 FPS, a smooth experience with decent graphics, although the colors. It may be stable at first, but the issue disappears after a short play session. Witcher 3 is a game from that era. I used the hardware efficiently, even achieving high settings 1080p performance. We hit about 90 FPS, an excellent, very fresh experience frankly. Finishing with Crash 3 again on a machine like this is an absolutely awesome idea, Uncharted. It's known as a demanding game that heavily taxes the hardware, and I indeed put the system to the test as well. High resource usage, yet performance was very modest. We barely managed 25 FPS and had to. Dropping the graphics to low settings gave a noticeable boost in solid frame rates. Honestly, it was a much better experience. Much more demanding, yet it still heavily strains the CPU. CS2 is essentially a must-have game. It's competitive on this specific list, but the game has become somewhat demanding. I tried it on low settings with FSR enabled to maximize frame rate. The system actually exceeded 100 FPS. But note that the graphics card is running at about half its capacity, which means it's a bottleneck. A ceiling of 100-120 FPS is the processor's maximum, so it makes no sense to play beyond that. For low settings, the best configuration for me in this case is very high settings to XSM. Yes, that's to boost GPU usage and achieve better graphics because the frames are essentially. It won't exceed 100 FPS and will stay in the same state, but we'll get nicer graphics too. GPU usage jumped from 50% to about 80-90%, so I think this setup is preferable. The most balanced setup, the original Red Dead Redemption, a truly outstanding game. It was released in 2010, only recently became available for PC, and I finished it in 2013 as far as I know. I think it was on the Xbox 360. If you're interested in an epic episode about the device, just write to me in the comments. The comments say the story continues after part 2, so you'll need to play the second part. First, then return to the first part's experience, as shown here, over 80 frames with old graphics but with a very distinct charm, Spider-Man 1080p high settings. Definitely high with FSR2, and the good thing is the system achieved excellent frame rates, roughly over around 50 FPS at the 1% low, good and stable, and in some sections it even hit 60 FPS. Honestly, I'm very satisfied with this performance, so I'll stop here for today. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. This was your friend Miftah. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God. Yeah.